everyone. This is Bob Sullivan, and for those that tried to watch the study on Tuesday night, last Tuesday, uh, I apologize because we had some technical difficulties and were unable to either. Actually, what happened? The audio wasn't working properly, so we were just unable to broadcast. So, the purpose of this update is to fill those in that we're trying to get online and hopefully bring you up to speed. And then again, we'll continue next week. Needless to say, the topic for discussion that we considered on Tuesday night was the ongoing situation in Israel. And first of all, let me just recommend to those that are listening that if you have the opportunity to download on the Messenger app Amir Sarfati's updates, you're going to find that he virtually updates from Israel itself everything that's happening on a real-time basis. So that to me is the best source available to keep up with what's going on over there. I think also Fox and some of the main news networks have done a pretty good job of keeping us up to speed. I would not recommend anybody go to MSNBC. I don't think that's a very good source. I think they tend to be kind of tainted. But again, that's a choice that everybody has to make. Again, Fox I think has done a good job. I haven't watched Newsmax, but I'm sure they're doing well, doing a good job as well. But at least with Fox, it appears as though it's pretty much a 24/7 update, and it's a tragic situation, as has been stated, and I'm sure we've all watched the news in the last week or so since this occurred. They're calling this Israel's 9/11, and it's been stated that demographically, with roughly 9 million people in Israel, of which there's I think 7 million or 8 million Jewish folks, Jews, that with the 1,300 now I think is the latest count of people that have been killed on the Israeli side, and obviously the number of deaths on the Arab side is increasing as well. But they equate it to their own 9/11, which in terms of population, comparing Israel's population of 8 million to ours of over 300 million, that's basically the equivalent of 30,000 Americans should such an event occur here. So very tragic, and of course Israel is under a barrage of attacks. I believe, and we'll talk about this next week, what I expect is going to happen in the near future, because without getting too much into detail right now, I think what we're seeing is, among other things, the stage being set for the coming Gog, Magog, Ezekiel 38:9 invasion. And we'll talk more about that in the future, probably on Tuesday night. We can't be certain. Only God knows the precise details. But I think in terms of what's going to take place, Israel has a very powerful military, and as we're going to see tonight, Israel is the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, are God's chosen people, and He has, as we're going to see in a moment, we're going to look at a couple of scriptures, but the God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. So while this looks pretty tough for Israel right now, my view is that at some point in time they're going to come out victorious. I don't know how long it's going to take. Obviously, we're hearing it could take some time, but more about that in the future. So in terms of just kind of a general update as to what took place, I find it amazing. I don't get dogmatic about things like this, but it's amazing that the event that occurred in southern Israel from Gaza last weekend occurred almost to the day, if not the day, 50 years after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Israel was experienced a surprise attack. And if you study the history of that, it's pretty fascinating that Golda Meir, who at that time was the prime minister, reached out to Richard Nixon, the then president of the United States, who, by all accounts, was I wouldn't say he was an anti-Semite, but he was not a real fan of Israel. But when he was a young child, his mother, who I understand was a pretty devout believer, told him that at some point in his life he would have the chance to help the nation of Israel. And when that chance came, or when that opportunity came, to do so and to go above and beyond whatever you're asked to do. Well, lo and behold, he's asked by Golda Meir to provide support in terms of military arms and equipment. His administration did not favor doing so, but he remembered his mother's words and provided not just the support that Israel was looking for, but went over and above and beyond that. And many would say that it was because of Richard Nixon that Israel was able to prevail in that war. And if you just think about it logically, it was God who was behind that. God who foresaw, I'm sure, many years before it occurred, the 73 war, and prepared this woman to convey to the leader of the free world at the time to prepare her and him to support Israel. I find that to be fascinating, and I think the same thing is going to happen here. God often allows Israel, his chosen people, to go to the brink before he intercedes. And I believe that between the determination, the strength, the ingenuity, the ability of the Israeli Defense Forces, coupled with God, who, as we'll see, neither slumbers nor sleeps when it comes to Israel, that they're going to come out of this. And Tuesday night, I'll expand on why I think that's going to happen. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but I think we're in store for, well, there's going to be a lot more carnage. Things are going to happen there that are, I think, are going to surprise a lot of people. And again, I'll expand on that next week. As of this morning, reports are that there were over 1,300 Israelis killed. We're hearing some absolutely horrific stories. The brutality, the savagery of what took place can only be equated to one thing, and that is that this attack and the ongoing attacks are satanic, and Satan has every reason to do what he can to eliminate the Jewish people. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but it's absolutely satanic. I used to listen to a fellow by the name of Dave Hunt, and he was a great expositor and just an expert in biblical apologetics. And he would often say, when he was explaining a situation, he said, let's just get logical here. And we can dance around and certainly look at the evil that's being committed, but at the end of the day, if you look at it logically, largely because so much that's happening, the savagery, the brutality, which obviously none of us can get our minds around, can only be the result of a satanic influence. And we'll have a lot to say on that. Again, Satan knows his time is short. We're in the last days, folks, and he is going to pull out all the stops. And as we read Jesus' own words in Matthew 24, we find that when these things begin to take place, they're only going to become more intense and more frequent. In other words, get worse and worse as time goes on. So while there may be some bright spots on the horizon, overall, I think that we're going to see things get worse and worse. So more to come on that. So the instigator, the group that instigated this, was a group known as Hamas. Hamas took control of the Gaza in 2005, 2006, when it was decided to expel, if memory serves, some 4,000 to 6,000 Jewish inhabitants of Gaza, to expel them and allow the so-called Palestinians, or the Arabs, to have total control. So under the leadership of the then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, with support from the U.S. administration under George W. Bush at the time, it was decided to remove those Jewish inhabitants and turn it over to the Palestinians, who in no time whatsoever destroyed completely the means of earning capabilities, which were primarily greenhouses and other agricultural developments that the Jews had brought there, and was very prosperous. And after the Jews left, those greenhouses and other means of income were swiftly destroyed. And then in 2006, Hamas took control. In a moment, I'm going to go through some information on Hamas and what they're all about. The Arabs are the Hamas group, obviously they had a plan in place, and to just set the stage a little bit. I know there's a lot of discussion in the media about whether or not Iran, the nation of Iran, is behind this. Well, we know for a fact that Hamas is a proxy for Iran, as is Hezbollah, which is another terrorist group situated in Lebanon, to the north, kind of the northwest, if you will, of Israel. They too are rattling some sabers and indicating that they may move on Israel from the north, which would mean a two-pronged war, to say nothing of what could happen in what we know to be Judea and Samaria. The world calls it the West Bank, which consists largely of Palestinian authorities, the Fatah group, which also has the propensity, or not as violent as Hamas and Hezbollah, but certainly poses a threat. There have been a number of terrorist attacks over the last several months by the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and so that is a possibility. Also, we know that there is some activity on the part of Syria, and Syria's leader has been told in no uncertain terms that if he gets involved, that he could be in very serious trouble. We'll also discuss at a later time, there's a very interesting prophecy in the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, which prophesies that at some point in time, Damascus, virtually the oldest city in the world, continuous city in the world, at some point in time is going to be destroyed to the point where it will become uninhabitable. That has not yet happened, but Damascus, of course, is the capital of Syria, and many believe that could trigger even more activity going forward. What we need to understand as well is that while this particular attack is not specifically mentioned in the Bible, we know that if we read in Psalm 83, that there will be, let me just go there quickly. It sums up pretty well what's going on over there. But in Psalm 83, we read about a conspiracy, if you will, against God's people. This is very interesting. In Psalm 83, it says, O God, do not remain silent, do not turn a deaf ear, do not stand aloof, O God. See how your enemies, this is interesting, this is not necessarily Israel's enemies. They are Israel's enemies because they're God's enemies. But in no uncertain terms, he says in verse 1, or verse 2 rather, see how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning, they surprise against you, they conspire against your people. And so when you think about Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, many other Muslim nations are all at one time conspiring against Israel. For what purpose? To destroy, to annihilate the Jewish people, to move them out of Israel. And as we'll see when we look just briefly at the Hamas charter, the objective is not to just take and build a new state, a two-state solution. It goes much deeper than that. The Muslim world, for the most part, at least on the Shia side, maybe a little less on the Sunni side, although I think it's pretty prevalent throughout most of Islam, does not feel that Israel even has a right to exist. And so there's been a lot of years of propaganda that have led many people to believe that they don't even have a right to exist. Moving on. So with cunning, this attack by Hamas, many are saying it was a tremendous intelligence failure, which it was. But I think if we were to study the details for the last couple of years, Hamas, under the leadership of Iran, under the direction of Iran, in a very cunning fashion, prepared for the attack. So they are cunning, they're deceitful. Satan, as we read in many places in the New Testament and 2 Corinthians 4 and other places, is the god of this world and is a deceiver. He's a liar. He's the king of all liars. So he's inspiring the mullahs and so forth in Iran to do what they're doing. He says, come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation. Think about that. Here is a prophecy written probably 700 or 800 years, 750 maybe BC, about the times in which we live today. Now, throughout history, there have been those that have conspired to destroy Israel as a nation, but up until 1948, Israel was not a nation. They didn't become a nation again until May 14th, 1948, after 2,000 years without having control of their own land. That changed on May 14th, 1948. So they are a nation now, and this group that's conspiring against them is conspiring against them as a nation. And why? So that Israel's name is remembered no more. The objective is to wipe Israel off the face of the map, to remove them from existence. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. They form an alliance against you. It's often been said that the Muslims, they'll even fight among each other. If you remember, Pastor Rob mentioned a prophecy the other day, or a statement about Ishmael, how he would be a wild donkey of a man fighting against his brothers and so forth. And that same label was given to Abraham's sons, or I'm sorry, Ishmael's sons, who also were labeled as donkeys, wild donkeys, fighting against each other, fighting against their brothers. And that's been their MO throughout history. And so the nations that are conspiring, for the most part, have descended from Ishmael and Esau, or a combination of the two, and possibly even Lot a little bit. So they say, let us come and destroy them as a nation, so that Israel's name is remembered no more. Isn't that interesting that we've got Iran that is saying that their objective is to destroy the little Satan, and, by the way, the big Satan, which is the United States, and moved them just to drive them into the Mediterranean Sea. The Jews, or the Arabs rather, the Muslims, the radical, the extremists, are not going to be happy until virtually every Jew on the face of the earth is destroyed, which is exactly what Satan is motivating them to do. It goes on to say, with one mind they plot together. They form an alliance against you. So basically, what this is saying is that the Arabs don't always agree with each other. They fight against each other. Remember, they're the descendants of Ishmael and his 12 sons. So they fight against each other, but there's one thing that they do agree upon, and that's a hatred of the Jewish people, a hatred of Israel. And again, that doesn't mean all of them. Not certainly, there are millions, and I wouldn't say millions, but hundreds of thousands of Muslims around the world that would never lift a finger against Israel. It's the extremists. Unfortunately, there are many extremists out there that are willing to do that. It says, with one mind they plot together, they form an alliance. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. So the tents of Edom refers to the descendants of Esau, who was Jacob's brother, who gave up his birthright. He was actually the firstborn, and by all rights, according to the customs of the time, should have received the inheritance, but God was not going to have it. So the birthright, the legacy, if you will, was passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and not Esau. So he's the father of the Edomites. Ishmael's the father of the Ishmaelites. Combined, they migrated and settled in what we know today to be Jordan and the Arabian Peninsula of Moab. Moab also represents Jordan, and the Hagrites. Remember Hagar. She was Ishmael's mother. She was an Egyptian. So this indicates that Egypt would be involved. Byblos, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia. Philistia is that's a nation that represents the Philistines, probably Israel's number one enemy throughout the times of the Old Testament. And the people of Tyre. Tyre represents Lebanon. So you've got today all of these nations represented. Even Assyria has joined them to reinforce Lot's descendants. Do to them as you did to Midian, and did to Sisera and to Jabin, and to at the river Kishon, who perished at Endor and became like dung on the ground. So this lament, if you will, by Ashba, the person writing this particular psalm, is that, you know, there are some, let me just say this, there are some that say that this represents a war that will take place before Ezekiel 38 and 39. Some of them call it the Psalm 83 war. If it is a war, that means that Saudi Arabia would have to be engaged in that, and quite frankly, I don't see that happening. There are others who say that, like Amir, I believe, feels that this, if it is a prophecy, took place when Israel first became a nation in 1948-49, when right after becoming a nation they were swiftly and quickly attacked by several Arab nations that surrounded them. So whether it's a war or not, now I will say this, and as we're seeing that some of these players today, represented by certainly the Philistia. Philistia would be the descendants from Esau and from Ishmael, primarily Esau, as I've learned, but the Philistia relocated in the area that today we know as Gaza. So according to this, it could be said that the Gazans, or the Hamas groups, were descendants of the ancient Philistines. Do to them as you did. And that when it talks about doing, this is author of the Ashba pleading with God, lamenting to please do with these nations as you did to several of these that we read about in places like First and Second Samuel and so forth, where God virtually turned a lot of Israel's enemies during the Old Testament over to the Jews who defeated them pretty readily. And in verse 12, who said, "Let us take possession of the pasture lands of God." So Hamas is not interested in just a two-state solution. Hamas wants it all. Hamas is not only interested in all of the state of Israel, which means that there would be no Jews there, but they want to, much like ISIS, wanted to establish a worldwide caliphate. And that gets into another subject which time doesn't permit us to get into now, which has to do with the very solid belief by many Muslims that there is a 12th imam that is scheduled to arrive on the scene at some point in the future, and that in order to prepare for his arrival, and he's been, according to Muslim tradition, has been locked up for 1400 years, just waiting for the right time. It's kind of like we're waiting for Jesus to return; they're waiting for the 12th imam. But they believe it's their goal, it's their duty to create chaos and to destroy Israel in order to prepare the way for the arrival of the 12th Imam. So there's a lot of moving parts going on here. Make them like tumbleweed, my God, like chaff before the wind. And so I'm not going to read the rest of this because I've got quite a few other things I want to go through, but this is it's an amazing prophecy, Psalm 83. Whether it is a Psalm 83 war or just a lament or just Ashba crying out to God, we don't know. I'm inclined to think that it's not an actual war, but by the same token, only God knows for sure. What we do know is that there is a major offensive on the horizon, as outlined in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, when a confederacy of nations will move on Israel, led by Magog, as it's stated, which is modern-day Russia, under a leader, Gog. God himself, that's G-O-G. God himself, our God, is going to place some thoughts into the mind of Gog and force him with this confederacy of nations that include Turkey, Iran, Libya, and likely Sudan. Those 5 nations, but the 3 main players are Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And I think, again, Tuesday night I'll get into some of the indications that this is really heating up based on some statements made by Putin and Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. Very much anti-Israel, although Putin did come out today or yesterday and made some statements about the brutality of the attacks, which is kind of interesting in light of what's going on in Ukraine. But that's another subject for another day. So, but what's happened now, and there are those who have asked me and have asked others if what we're seeing now is Ezekiel 38, and the answer to that is no, it's not. Because Hamas is a terror group. It's not a nation. Ezekiel 38 very specifically states that there will be 3 main nations that will make this move, and God's going to supernaturally destroy this army that's going to move upon Israel. That certainly didn't happen. So it's not Ezekiel 38 and 39. Is it a precursor to it? Perhaps. Now, without getting too much into the weeds at this point in time, there's a verse in Ezekiel 38 regarding this invasion that says that Israel will be in a state of peace and safety will be caught totally off guard when this invasion takes place. The peace in the Hebrew literally means tranquility. So that certainly is not a condition or a situation that we know exists in Israel today. They're far from believing they're in peace. I'm sure many with memories of the Holocaust and just the hatred that's growing throughout the world against Israel, that the security thing is there's just tremendous fear throughout of all of Israel. And as you remember earlier on, I said that I believe that this is all going to work out. First of all, we know that the Jews are in the land to stay. They're not going to, I'll go through a few scriptures in a moment. They're not going to be expelled. So we've got to get from the point today, because we know Ezekiel 38:39 is still in the future. We've got to get to the point from today, which is one of angst, anxiety, fear, horror, savagery, all of those types of things, to a point of peace and security when Israel will again be duped and attacked by these these nations. So that's why I think that part of me that thinks there could be a pretty swift end to this whole thing with Hezbollah and Hamas. But then again, we don't know for sure. So, more to come on that. Right now, and I think this is interesting as well, the world, including the United States, is totally in support of Israel. They support Israel based on what happened. And as I said Tuesday night, it reminds me of the Holocaust. And shortly after the end of World War II, it was actually in 1948, that among other things, and there were a lot of things that led to it, but one of the things that existed during that period of time, when the world got wind of the Holocaust, there was a time of sympathy throughout the world for the Jewish people, which ultimately allowed for the creation of the State of Israel. And you talk about prophetic. There's a verse in the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, I think it's verse 4, which said, "How could a nation be born in one day?" And that's exactly what happened on May 14th, 1948. So it was during that period of time, right after the war, when the world had a brief moment of sympathy for Israel, for the Jewish people, that the state of Israel was allowed to be reestablished. So I think that's what's happening now. I think that right now you've got virtually all of the world just lining up with Israel, certainly the United States. And I have to say that I thought one of the best things that I've seen happen recently was when Secretary of State Blinken, and today is the 19th or 20th, that was just yesterday when Blinken, of October, that Blinken met with Bibi Netanyahu, and of course Secretary of State Blinken is Jewish, and he was given a lot of information and was able to see some of the atrocities that took place. And while this administration has far from been a friend of Israel's, I got a sense in just listening to him that as of right now, the United States totally supports Israel, and I believe would inject themselves militarily, or at least provide. They've already committed to providing supplies and weapons and ships and planes and jets and so forth. So I thought that was very, very inspiring. And I have to admit that while President Biden neglected to mention Iran, we could see his humanity the other day when he talked in terms of Israel, or what is going on there, and how horrible it was. So right now, there's sympathy being expressed, obviously, for Israel from virtually all the nations of the world. But here's what I fear is going to happen, and this is shared by many that I listen to, and that is it's just probably a matter of time before the world will start to turn against Israel. So what's going to cause that to happen? Well, many like to think, and it's often been kind of an argument throughout the last since Israel became a nation engaged in all these wars and skirmishes, and this isn't the first time they've obviously battled with Hamas, but that there is there's a mutual amount of violence. There's what they call a cycle of violence that the Arabs will mercilessly kill innocent Jews, and then once the pictures start coming back or the reports coming in, it's already starting about civilians in Gaza being killed, then there's going to be probably, I think, very, very likely, very, very real chance that, again, the world will begin to condemn Israel, demand things like a ceasefire. And Israel this time, I don't think is going to do that. I don't think they're going to succumb to the international pressure, which is going to just more lead to growing anti-Semitism. And if you're watching the news, particularly with these marches by various Palestinian groups all over the world, including New York and other cities in the United States, basically chanting that Israel got what it deserved last weekend. That's just the foretaste of it. And I know that there's some news networks that basically have taken that position. I have an article here. I'll just read the title of it, and this was right after the attack. And the title of this: UN General Secretary condemns Hamas terror acts, but is deeply distressed by Israel's response. This was just within a couple of days of the attack. And this is Gutierrez, the UN Secretary General. He says, "I recognize the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people," which means that he's creating and standing on the narrative that Israel is responsible for their for what's going on with the Palestinian people, the grievances they have. But nothing can justify these acts of terror and killing, maiming, and abduction of civilians. So he obviously criticizes what took place. "I reiterate my call to immediately cease these attacks and release all hostages." The official went on to criticize Israel's response to the violence, warning the country against harming innocents. And so here we go again, that Israel is going to, I believe, will be more and more condemnation of Israel as time goes on, because we live in a day when instantaneous news, and it's going to look as though it's going to be stated and believed that Israel has gone too far. When the world needs to be prepared that Hamas needs to be destroyed, and that's what Bibi Netanyahu is committed to. That's what Israel's committed to. So, I expect that's going to the condemnation is going to at least, maybe, I don't know if it's going to be a week, a month, 6 months, or what, but you can believe that sooner or later the anti-Semitism is going to again explode. And why do I say that? Well, we have many verses in the Bible, not the least of which is in the book of Zechariah, which talks about Israel becoming a hated nation, a hated people. And in Zechariah chapter 12, we read that "I will pour out on the house of David, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and supplication. They will look upon me." So this is a prophecy, and again, I'll get into this in more detail later. A prophecy of the Jews will ultimately turn to Jesus Christ. But before then, it says that on that day, this is verse 8, "The Lord will shield those who live in Jerusalem so that the feeblest among them will be like David. And if you read 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel, David was a warrior. And his victories were all under the direction and under God's hand. God delivered his enemies into David's hands. And so David was powerful because he had God's support. Then he goes on to say, the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. And he goes on to say, I will set out. Who's going to set out? God's going to set out to destroy all the nations that attack Israel. So all the nations means just that, all the nations. And so in Numbers chapter 23, let me just go back to that real quick. We have another prophecy, which talks about Israel. And in 23 it talks about, if I can find it here, that Israel will be, they'll be by themselves. They're going to be, and I can't find the exact verse as I sit here right now, but I'll be sure to have that Tuesday night. But that Israel will be alone in the world. And so you can count on that happening. So Israel's going to be alone. All the nations are going to turn against them. Right now, even in spite of what's going on, we're seeing an explosion of anti-Semitism. We have our administration, and while I extolled the virtues of what President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken stated recently, prior to the outbreak of violence, they were very much in support of a two-state solution. In other words, to carve out significant portions of what we know Israel to be today, the modern state of Israel, cut it up, divide it, and give it to the so-called Palestinians as their own individual state. And we'll get into that in greater detail later, but that would be the kiss of death. But yet we have so many in the world, the United States, the United Nations, the European Union, so many advocating for that. And even Putin came out recently and said the answer, the solution to the problem is two states, an individual state. So what's important as we go through this is kind of an introductory study. I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. Certainly we're going to get back into some of the other very important topics as we go on. But it's important to see and to understand what God says about Israel. And I'm going to get into Tuesday night a little bit more detail on the Abrahamic covenant as initially outlined in the book of Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, where we see that God made several promises, unconditional, eternal promises to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the Jewish people. And how, while Israel has not always been faithful to God, he has been faithful to them. And while they've not always occupied the land of Israel throughout the last 4,000 years or 3,500 years or so, it's theirs nonetheless. God gave the land of Israel to the Jews. He did not give it to the Palestinians, even though you see all these people going on and on and on about how Israel is the rightful owner, or Palestine, the Arabs are the rightful owners. It's simply not true. So let me just go through a couple of quick verses here to put things in perspective, beginning with the book of Exodus. This is chapter 3 and verse 15, and I'm trying not to take things out of context because these are individual verses, but I think they pretty much stand on their own. And in chapter 3, verse 15, God said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. So here's an affirmation that God is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob and their descendants, which are the Jewish people. He's their God that sent you. And then he goes on to say, God through Moses in the book of Exodus, and this is really what we're looking at here. This is my name. What? This is my name, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is my name, and the name you shall call me from generation to generation. So go through the history of Israel and all the mistakes they made and the rebellion and so on and so forth. God has never forsaken them, and he never will. So it's interesting as you go through the Bible that in Scripture, Israel, the name Israel is mentioned 2,500 times. The children of Israel, which Israel ultimately was the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you read, I believe it's in Genesis 32, somewhere around there, when God changed Jacob's name to Israel. So he is the father, as was Abraham and Isaac, of the Jewish people of Israel. They are the children of Israel. Mentioned 644 times. The God of Israel, 203 times. Jerusalem is mentioned 600 times in the Bible. You know how many times it's mentioned in the Quran? Not once. Not once. Jerusalem became the third holiest city to Muslims after Muhammad came along at 600 AD. And there's no mention of it anywhere in the Bible. Jerusalem is, you have the mosque in Jerusalem. The mosque is known as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa in the Quran just simply means a place of far-off worship. It's not identified. But Jerusalem was chosen to be this place. And why was it chosen? Well, Satan had a purpose. He wanted to control Jerusalem. If we want to know where we are in Bible prophecy and God's time clock, look at the nation of Israel, because Israel itself is the hour hand. Jerusalem is the second hand, or the minute hand, and Temple Mount is the second hand. And you have so much controversy and hatred surrounding the Temple Mount, and very, very significant in terms of that particular place. So in the I'm going to go to the book of Amos, and I'm going to pare this down a little bit because I know it's getting kind of late, but the book of Amos has a very interesting, I think, scripture in chapter 9 of the book of Amos. So, historically, just so you know, Israel was exiled back around 686 BC because of their failure to obey some of God's commands and decrees, most particularly dealing with allowing the land to lie fallow. They were exiled to Babylon, whereas we read in the book of Jeremiah they were to stay for a period of 7 years. So there was the first exile from Judea, Jerusalem, to Babylon. But there was also a second exile where God throughout the Old Testament said that he was going to scatter his people, the Jewish people, to the four corners of the earth. And in and that's the second dispersion. And in chapter 9 of the book of Amos, we read in verse 13, the days are coming. That's a reference to a time in the future. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, and the planter by the one treading grapes. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from the hills. And I will bring my people back from exile. So there we go. That's the second exile, from the four corners of the earth. This isn't bringing them back from Babylon. This is bringing them back from all corners of the earth, as we read in Ezekiel and other places. that God dispersed them to the four corners of the earth and he brings them back from the four corners of the earth. And it's God who brings them back. And so I will bring my people back from exile. That's what we've been seeing happen in Israel in earnest since 1948. Today there are roughly 7 million Jews, pretty close to 50% of the world's Jewish population. 2% of the world's population represented by the Jewish people. 7 million are now back in Israel. God's brought them back. They've come back from 70 different countries where they were expelled to for their disobedience. But yet God is faithful and loves the Jewish people, and he's bringing them back. So I will bring my people back from Israel. So we see people coming back to Israel. It's God that's doing it. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. That's happened since 1948. The rebuilding has taken place there is unbelievable. Plant the vineyards and drink the wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. Israel's become one of the leading exporters of fruits and vegetables and flowers in the world. And think about the fact that that's largely a desert area, but they have used incredible technology given to them by God and an ability to use drip irrigation and other means to make that land fertile, exactly as God said they would. Then he goes on to say something very interesting in verse 15. I will plant Israel in their own land. It didn't say I'll plant them in the Arabs' own land. It's their own land. It's their own land because I, God, gave it to them. And then listen to this. Never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them. So here's a promise by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he's given them this land and they're never again going to be removed. Never. So when you have Iran saying that they're going to drive the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea and wipe them all out. Now Hamas saying that they want all the land as clearly outlined in their charter, which I'm not going to get into now, but the Hamas charter clearly, which was ratified in 2017. You just want to read that, just go to do a Google search and look up a Hamas charter and you'll find it. They're committed to taking over not part of the land. They're not going to be content with a two-state solution. They want it all because they disagree, as do most Muslims, do not believe that Israel has a right to the land. But that's not what God says. And so the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we read in something very interesting in Psalm 121. I just love what we read here in 121. Where it says, this is a short one, it says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, listen to this, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. God's watching Israel. He's got his eyes on them 24/7. We read in 2 Chronicles that his eyes are upon the Temple Mount 24/7. It's his temple. And you just can't make up the fact that little piece of real estate, 35 acres of land, is such a hotbed with the Muslims believing that it's their third holiest site. But we know beyond any doubt whatsoever that that's where the first two temples were. And so they belong to Israel. Will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore. Now, he doesn't say that there won't be death and destruction, but as a nation, as a people, they're never again going to be scattered. And so it's too bad that we have so many in the world today that are so against Israel, and it comes from the pits of hell. And let me just quickly, and I'm going to probably end here, but quickly explain why this is satanic. Satan knows the end of the story. He knows that in Daniel chapter 2 and in Matthew 24 and Second Thessalonians 2 and of course the book of Revelation, throughout the Bible, that there's coming a time when Jesus Christ is going to return the second time. And when that occurs, that's basically it for Satan until the end of the kingdom age, when he's going to be allowed to make one last appearance. But his future is set in stone. He's done. He's toast. He was defeated when Jesus Christ went to the cross and God poured out his wrath on our Savior. He took our sins in our place. He was crucified in our place. We deserve to be crucified for our sin. But Jesus made that sacrifice, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, the perfect sacrifice. And so Satan knows that his time is short. And he knows that from what we read in Hosea, what we read in Matthew 23, what we read throughout virtually the whole Bible, that was basically alluded to in Zechariah and so many other places, Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, that at some point in time, the Jews are going to cry out and call for Jesus to come and help them. It'll be during the time of their greatest need. And what they're going through now is nothing compared to what's going to happen during the tribulation, when, as we read in Zechariah 13, 2/3 of the Jewish people will be killed. That's not what happened this past weekend, and I don't think it's on the horizon in the near future. The Holocaust was less than just about 50% or so, but we read in Zechariah, which has never happened, so it's yet future, happens during the tribulation, 2/3 are going to perish. But at some point, they're going to call out to Jesus Christ, and that's when they're going to, as we read about in Revelation as well as Zechariah, the Jews will recognize. Right now, the Jews, for the most part, don't accept Jesus as their Messiah. They've rejected him, which is one of the reasons why they've been blinded to the faith, as we read about in the book of Romans. But those blinders are going to come off. They're going to call out to him. But it says very clearly in Hosea and in Matthew 24 that until that happens, until what happens? Until they call out, call upon the name of the Lord, Jesus Christ, to come and rescue them. Until they do that, he won't return. As I mentioned last year and I mentioned Tuesday night, every Gentile on the face of the earth could accept Christ, but he won't come back until the Jewish people, or at least a remnant of the Jews at the end of the tribulation, call upon him. He can't come back until that time. And so Satan believes that if he could eliminate, and you look through history, how he's tried to do so throughout history. Read the book of Esther. Think about how Herod tried to kill and destroy Jesus by killing all of the male 2 years and younger, in order to eliminate Jesus Christ and to prevent his sacrifice, under the direction of Satan. Look at Adolf Hitler and how he tried to eliminate the Jewish people. Look at what's going on with the Muslim world today, how they're trying, and how the world, the so-called Palestinians and Arabs, are screaming for the destruction of Israel. It's satanic. As I said earlier, Dave Hunt says, let us just reason together. That's what Isaiah says. Let's just think about things logically. There's no other explanation. It's not natural in any form or human in any form to behead little babies or kill 80-year-old women, or to just do some of the things, or all of the things that Hamas did. It's not human. It's not real. It's because of Satan his ultimate goal is to wipe out Israel. That's what we're seeing. But it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And we as Christians need to stand behind Israel. We need to stand up for them, behind them, with them. We don't want to be like Peter, who, after the third question, the cock crowed 3 times, or the cock crowed after he denied Jesus 3 times. We don't want to do that. We need to stand up and support the people of Israel. And right now, many people, Christian, secular people and other, are doing just that because of what happened. But I fear that that's going to change. So that's just kind of a summary of what we went over Tuesday. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. We'll be back, God willing, on Tuesday night when we will continue this discussion. A lot more to say, a lot more details. Again, we don't pretend to know all the details, only God does. But we live in exciting times, and we live in a time when we know that Jesus Christ is going to return and return soon. So, thank you for your time. See you again Tuesday. This video will be available at some point in time, and as will our other classes on Tuesday. So with that, I'll sign off and talk to you again later.